Hello and welcome to another Tuesday, 2 o'clock with Revel Coach Plus. And today we are lucky because Mykle White is in the house with us. And I have two really important questions to ask everybody.
Okay.
How do you see the world? And have you ever needed to transition to the next step, but didn't know how? Well, Mykle White is someone who can help us determine those next steps. And she's created this innovative program and she has a company called Nunda. My very first question is, tell me about the name Nunda. How did that evolve?
Oh my goodness, absolutely. So first off, thank you, beautiful dames, for having me. Very, very excited to have the conversation. So how Nunda came about, Nunda is actually the name that I gave to my mother once she became a grandmother. It's a sort of a combination of Nana and her name, which was Autumn Thunda, hyphenated. And my mother was probably the queen of perspective. She was just really, really amazing at looking at things differently, looking at the world differently, looking at possible differently, even looking at miscommunication differently. And so I was raised with an understanding that it's really perspective that makes the world go round. And so I started a company to, based on perspective and the powers of perspective and sort of creating transformational shifts by way of perspective.
There's nothing better than when you can find a name that's really cool. Because I think the name Nunda is just a really cool name to begin with for a company, but then to have a story like that after your mom and somebody that's like really, has inspired you with perspective. And I feel like coaching is one of the most powerful things you can do to help your clients is help teach them a new way to look, like a new perspective of the current situation that's causing them a lot of stress. So do you have any techniques you like to share? Anything like how you help other people break through and find those new perspectives?
Absolutely. So I actually just recently did a soft launch of, we don't call it a program, we call it an approach, but it's called Breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs is a tool-based program centered around creating breakthroughs, just like what you were referring to, again and again and again, and finally getting away from the guilt, right, of being a parent. We all laugh and joke about it, but it's real. And, we don't talk about things like parenting imposter syndrome, right? So, which is a thing. So I'm very, very excited to introduce this program to more people who happen to be parents.
All right. Well, we would love to introduce it to our community. Can you tell us more? Like, it sounds awesome. So the approach, not program, how long is it? And I had to think for a second. How long is it? Like, how is it, is it self-guided or how do you help people through breadcrumbs?
Sure. So they would enroll into the program, and the enrollment and application process it's really designed to get the person thinking through what is the legacy that they want to create, right? So like, what is that blueprint? So that's what the application process is about. And explaining breadcrumbs, I will start with my own personal story, which was when I became a mother. It was not my plan. It wasn't. Maybe one day, I'm not even sure. It just kind of was put into my life at a time when I had about 4 years worth of plans in my mind. And all I could do was cry and mourn all of the things I would never get to do and all of the experiences I would never get to have, because according to everyone, right, life stops when baby comes. And it's not true, by the way. And I remember, having this amazing conversation with Nunda. I was with child and I showed up at her door I could not stop crying. I could not stop crying. And the things that she said to me with her amazing perspective not only changed my life, but I remember once my daughter Bryce was born, looking at her, and there were some days I would think, gosh, I just love her so much. And that's so crazy that she'll never really be able to understand how much I love her. And other days I would look at her and I would be terrified about the future and, well, what does it all mean? And I had been through my stuff with my mom, right? And I was still going through it in some ways and was very fearful that I had signed up for getting my heart broken, right? Like, I'm going to love this baby. I'm going to love this child. And then she's going to grow up and blame me for everything, or she's going to grow up and hate. And I didn't know. So I remember looking at her one day and all of these things my mother told me came back to me. And I thought to myself, well, if nobody's ever ready to be a parent, and if none of us know how any of this is going to play out, but we all sort of start off the same as parents, right? Loving our babies, wanting the best for them. Well, it seems like something needs to change. So what I decided was, since I had no control over the future, I could control my little part in raising her and in trying to instill values, but I wanted her to know that days like the one I experienced that day where we, were squealing because bugs were squealing, and days where we splashed in puddles and screamed Barney songs at the top of our lungs. I wanted her to know days like that happened, no matter what the future held. I also wanted her to know my limitations as a person. I wanted her to understand I couldn't teach her the things that I myself had not learned yet. I wanted her to understand that that book is true. Everything I learned in kindergarten, right? Everything I need to know about life, I learned in kindergarten. It's true. And I wanted her to understand that many of the same obstacles, decisions that she's going to be faced with as a little bitty person, and then again as an 8-year-old and as a teenager, it keeps showing up in adulthood, right? And so what I created is a way to not only be honest with my daughter in a human way about the person who happens to be her mother, but I wanted her to see the evolution of this relationship between she and I, because that relationship is going to affect every part of her future. And I wanted in real time a way to show her that I am doing my best. This is what best looks like for me, but also bring her into some of the real world, everyday decisions that will find her in adulthood as well. But I put it all together as sort of a time capsule that will be gifted to her at one point in her adulthood. That was a very long answer, extremely long. I hope that was okay, but that is how breadcrumbs and paper banking, which is the act of actually incorporating the approach into your life with your kids. That's how it was born. It was born out of my love and out of my fear.
What a gift. A quick side note, our mom always gave us the book, All You Ever Need to Learn. Everything I ever learned, I learned in kindergarten. So that was like kind of fun little side note there. But what a gift to give to parents, because I do feel like so often you're doing so much, and a lot of the things, if you're, it's kind of your mind space is cluttered with worry, you don't even recognize all the great things you're doing. So even as you're telling your story, I could just kind of relate my story going through those types of phases. And as you said, like the time capsule of doing that, I was like, wish we met earlier. My kids are a lot older now, but I think I got some memories from back there. But that's really, that's a beautiful program. That'll be very rewarding for a lot of people to go through it.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I feel like, depending on your zip code, and this could cover so many different things. So when my kids were little, and I lived in a zip code where every child was involved in about 45 different activities, it didn't matter. They started when they were like 2 years old. And then you move like one zip code over and you've got like the bohemian parents, and they're like, yeah, they can just go walk to the playground, have a good time, enjoy yourself. And so you become a parent based on those around you and your expectations of what you think somebody else is doing right or what someone else is doing wrong, and your perspective. So you're right about that perspective once again, right? So, and we only know what we know. I love how you said that there are things you haven't learned yet and you can't teach what you don't know. And that's so valuable because, you know, particularly working parents, we feel like we are often shortchanging our children for some reason, that we're not able to be there for every single moment. And you know what? I don't know that our kids want us there for every single moment. And so, but
We don't.
really, but really it is, it's like, it's coming to terms with the fact that we're growing together as a family. And that's that's the gift you're giving. And I love that.
That's exactly what it is. And so it's one thing to say, I was growing too. It's another thing to be able to show that in real time with a real scenario, right? And you're so right, Allison, when you were saying that, you know, we compare each other to other parents. And that's one thing I never did. And that what I want other people, what I'm hoping to inspire other people to stop doing, because the truth is, you're still going to be you. Like, I'm still going to be me. You're still going to be you. We could read every single parenting book. Oh my gosh, when Bryce was 3, I remember getting this book called Scream Free Parenting. And I was reading it and I was like, this makes so much sense. Oh my gosh. I'm like, if you don't go to bed right now. And I'm like, So the difference is with paper banking and breadcrumbs, I can now bring Bryce into the experience of all the ways that I try to be better, and whoops, I'm still screaming, right? And it's about, if we're all called mom and we're all called dad, our kids don't have any clue that we're not all built the same. We're all, equipped differently to handle life and things, but we're all called mom and dad. It's an instant comparison that happens, instant. And then we fall under that pressure, which is silly. So, breadcrumbs and paper banking is about you just being totally dialed in one-on-one to your evolving relationship with your child. It doesn't mean that it's supposed to look like scrapbooks where everything is adorable and childlike and happy, right? We know, because adulthood has shown us, when our children grow up, their memories of childhood are going to be so much fuller than the scrapbook, right? Or all the cute little So that's what it is. It's about a way to remain present, remain accountable to the parent that you always said you wanted to be in the first place. It's a place apart from and separate from all distractions, which is our phones and technology. And it's human. And there's one thing I think that it's special enough to remain always outside of technology's reach. And that is the relationships that we're having with our kids.
So good. And, there's so many things, like there's so many great nuggets that you're just sharing there. And the one thing that stands out to me is a lot of people that are successful in life, they have enough confidence to take a bigger risk, like to step in the room they don't feel invited, or apply for the position they don't know if they're qualified yet, but taking those big risks. But what you're really showing is at an early age, the parent doing that, the parent not being ready and didn't know it yet, and being humble and open and saying, see, we're learning together. So teaching at an early age that it's safe to take risks and it's safe to have like a growth mindset, or having humility, or having, just saying like, well, where do we go from here? And I think that's like a core value that a lot of people embrace when they get older, because they didn't have it when they might have been younger, or they might have just, maybe not had it in front of like their family. So I just think that's a really, really cool outcome of your program that will be teaching the kids through example.
Oh my gosh. So first off, thank you for picking up on that. I have to share, I don't want to share this story because it's painful, but I'm going to share the story. And this is where I realized I thought I knew what it was, because it's been in the backdrop of my life with my daughter the whole time. But there was a moment a few years ago that I was just like, oh my gosh. So here's the moment. I had been working on this huge project. So it was one of those things where it's like 16, 18-hour days for like every day for 2 weeks, like one of those where you finally have your weekend to sleep in, and you almost want to cry when your head hits the pillow because you're just like, bed, yay. Well, imagine how I felt just that Saturday morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. My 11-year-old daughter comes into my room and wakes me up and is like, we need to talk. And I was like, I'm sorry, what now? And I'm trying to keep my cool because I'm thinking to myself, what could not have waited until 11 a.m.? Really, would that have been so hard to just wait till 11 a.m.? And I feel myself getting angry, but I'm trying to control it because I'm like, let me assess the situation. The house isn't on fire. She's not bleeding. Is she extorting money from children at school? What's happening? So she like, I had a closet. So she moves the closet. There's a chair in the closet. She puts it so that she's facing me, gets comfortable, was completely unbothered by the rage that was simmering that I was trying to keep down. And she was like, are you up? Are you up? You ready? Gets up, turns on my side table light. Oh, she's lost her mind. She's lost her mind. And she's like, we need to talk. So I'm like, talk about what, Bryce? She's like, well, we need to talk about how you've been dropping the ball. I said, I'm sorry, what? And everything in me wanted to tell her, you are so ungrateful. And look at all these things I do. And I was like, and I was trying to keep myself calm. And she was like, all you do is work. I was like, wow, well, what do you think pays for this life, Bryce? What do you think pays for these things? We just came back from a trip. And she's like, yep, I know. I was like, I just took you on a surprise trip for your birthday. And she's like, yeah, I remember that. Do you remember what happened when we got back? No, Bryce, what happened? She's like, Mom, it was right back to work. It was the same thing. Then she grabs my purse because she's right there in the closet and does an impersonation of me.
At 3 in the morning.
At 3 in the morning, coming home on the phone. And so I just sat there and I listened. And it was extremely painful, right? She was telling me how much I was working and how much I'm on my phone. And I listened, and there were at times tears coming down her face. At times there were tears coming down my face, and I didn't say a word, and I didn't interrupt her, and I didn't jump up and yell objection like I wanted to. But I remember at one point I said to her, and we talked for 2 hours, and I said to her at one point, I was like, I'm really glad that you came here. We had this conversation. And I said, but I'm a little surprised. Like, what made you feel like you could come in here and have this conversation with me? And I'm asking because my grandmother would have knocked her to Tennessee the second she said you dropped the ball. My mother, who I love, but would have shut down emotionally. But I listened. Bryce's answer to me was, well, Mom, you've always made it pretty clear the kind of parent that you want to be. And so when you're not being that, who else is going to tell you but me? And I was like, wow, okay. So after I finished crying in the fetal position after she went to her room because it really hurt, I was like, wait a second. And I ran back to her room and I was like, Bryce, wait a second. I was like, do you understand what we have? And she's like, no. And I said, Bryce, do you know what the number one problem is between adults and their parents, or like parents and their adult children? She's like, what? I said, unspoken resentments, Bryce. I said, the things that we don't know how to start talking about, and the things that our parents don't really want to hear when we're 47. They don't want to hear about that thing that they did that when you were 9 that you're still holding on to. They're going to be like, grow up. So now your inner child still doesn't feel heard. They're feeling like you're the most ungrateful person ever. And around it goes. I said, as much as it sucked what just happened, we're having these conversations in real time. We're getting all these conversations out of the way. And it's because paper banking has been a part of her life from day one.
Well, and how
so
brave
that story shows that it's so much bigger.
What a beautiful story. I'm so glad you shared that story, because how brave is she to be honest? At the moment of pure inspiration, she's like, I'm just going to say it. And she knew she could trust you enough to say what was on her heart at the time that was right for her. And so that's a beautiful story. How old is she now?
Emotionally, she's
No,
like
how old is she?
54.
Emotionally.
But she's like 17.
Emotionally. That's
Yeah,
That's
wonderful.
great. What a great story. What a great
Thank
story.
you.
Yeah.
And we've had a lot of conversations like that since that morning night. And I'm always so glad every time we do. And I'm always surprised every time we have them. You know, they're never quite as painful as that first one, but you know, and it's been a while since we've had them. I think just a couple of months ago, but the whole thing is, again, we have them in real time so that it doesn't turn into, you know, resentment and festering issues later.
That's wonderful. So, may I ask a little bit more about your business as well?
Sure.
How long have you been in doing this business, and how did you choose to get into this work? I understand it's obviously a little bit from your mom and
Oh my
perspective.
goodness, it's all from my mom. Yeah, so the work, I didn't choose the work. The work chose me, Marcy. The work chose me. It's sort of, I mean, well, truly, it's true. So even when I was at Yelp, I was coaching. I was coaching reps, but I was coaching managers also, and it was all on perspective, right? I mean, I would have managers crying because they're like, I don't want to do this. I want to be backpacking with my boyfriend in Europe. How do you get that manager to care again, right? As far as paper banking, this was always what I would be doing. It just needed time. And I'm also so glad that I didn't launch when I first wanted to launch, because I've learned so much, right? And just having it. And as Bryce is now in this period of moving away from me, right? I mean, it's that period, and her friends are everything. She celebrated her birthday without me for the first year. You like, what? And the only good thing, well, there's so many good things, but do you know how excited I am? It's not time yet, but I get to go back and re-meet all of the versions of Bryce that I haven't seen in a long time, but like real time versions, not just her cutie pie little pictures, but like real moments, you know, that are in her paper bank. So I'm just so excited. I'm also excited for her to meet all the ways that I've grown. You know, me at 26, 27, 29 is not the same, right? As who I became in my 40s is not the same. You know, she's going to meet me when I struggled with discipline, right? The first time, and they cry and you're like, oh no. You know, she's gonna meet all of those sides. So she'll meet herself, and then she'll also meet me.
So is this like a journaling type of exercise? How does this actually work?
Yeah, so it's a guided program, just for context. It's guided. So there's monthly meetings. For some, they can choose to do one-on-one, where it's to create momentum around paper banking. The whole point is no one should feel pressured about doing this. It should completely be done at everyone's own pace. So it's about teaching people who happen to be parents how to recognize these breadcrumbs that are worthy enough of coming back to in the future.
And what is paper banking? I mean, that's where it's like the actual definition. I mean, is this like me writing a note, sticking it in a jar, and then I can pull it out later? Or
not bad, almost. So a paper bank is, and I will send you a picture. A paper bank it's completely enclosed with the just for one little opening on top. You cannot remove anything from it. It is just for deposit. So think in terms of what used to be a journal entry is now a deposit into your paper bank.
Gotcha.
Do not touch it, parent or child. You do not touch it. Once it's in, you leave it alone. And then the paper banking process can start anywhere from adoption, IVF process, pregnancy, and up until the child's 11th year of life. After that, you You leave it alone and it goes into sort of a maturation process, because now what happens is your kid needs to go live life and experience the same life that we've tried to shield them from for so long, right? In order to appreciate the gift of receiving their paper banks in the future. So they do not get it until any point after their 31st birthday. Yes, 31st birthday. If you do it before that, it's just a little too soon.
How did you come up with the age 31?
That's a great question. I don't know. I just know that it made sense.
Yeah.
And then when
I mean,
started-
I have
20 years.
children from 25 to 30. So I get it. They're just starting
Right. So
to
I was
get
going to
there.
say 31
but-
made sense to me. I knew in the 20s was too young, like for sure.
I'm going to
It's just-
guess. Daughter was 11 when you had that heart-to-heart conversation. So that's when it stopped. So that's where 11, and then 20 years later is 31.
Well, so it was already, so that's actually pretty good, but no, it was already a thing before she came and broke my heart that morning. It was already 31. And what's interesting is when I've spoken with other parents that have like kids in their 30s, every single one of them is like, oh my gosh. So that's what it is. It sounds like you figured it out, because they would have all these sweet little college. They're thinking of a lot. They're just like, thanks, mom. It doesn't mean anything. But so 31, but also I'm going to tell you why. So 31, but it could be 35, it could be 30. It's just any point after 31. But here's the part about it that I kind of touched on, but I didn't really speak about, but I think it's important that I mention this. One of, I think, the biggest missed opportunities of the parent-child experience, but especially when our children are children, is this. They can't benefit from the decisions that we make in real time and how parallel our lives actually are when you look at them. There were times, paper banking for Bryce, that I remember there were these two girls in her like daycare, and they were just so rude to her. They were so rude to her. And like every time that she would try to something, they would just make her feel bad. And we came up with this whole thing. We would be like, forget them. And she'd be like, forget them. So I'm writing to her about like, you know, don't let these little girls stop you from shining and blah, blah, blah. And as I'm writing, I was like, I'll be damned. Is this not what I'm doing right now at work? Isn't that why I didn't go for the promotion? And I wrote that to her. And I'm like, here I am telling you, but the truth is I'm not doing that. Here's the situation. And now here's why I'm not going for it. Why? Because little Bryce is not going to stay little Bryce. And guess what happens? Little Bryce will be in her 30s one day. She'll be the same age that I was when I was not going for opportunities out of fear of rocking the boat. But as a parent, all we want to know is that the things that we're teaching them will stick and they will follow them into adulthood. So instead of just saying it, let me show her how these things show up in adult life. It's not just when you're in daycare with these two little girls, Bryce, it's now. And these people that I call my friends, and you see us on the phone all the time, I'm letting them keep me from doing and so now when she's in her 30s and she pulls out that account out of her paper bank, I don't know what is going to be going on in her life when those things find her, but they're the things that they're classic. Mm-hmm. But it's me bringing her into the reality of me being at the prime of my life, making very real decisions, but at a time when she can really benefit from it because now she's in the prime of her life. Does that make sense?
Oh, so much sense. So I'm going to tell you what I learned from this, because this is like, I just had my own little breakthrough. So first part, which is like, so as that moment you're giving her advice about shining, and then you recognize you need to take your own advice. Somehow as adults, we give the simplest advice when they're in kindergarten, when they're younger, but we can't take the simplest advice. So like having that discipline to recognize that your problem is not as complicated as you think. There are some simple actions you can take to go forward. But the bigger thing that I learned is sometimes we oversimplify the child's problem. So I know there's so many children that have like depression now, like, there's some real things. So while in a scenario, you might just kind of look at the playground and be like, oh, well, you should do this and we should do that and move on. There's so many more complexity to what happened before the playground and all that stuff that maybe the child's problem could be a little bit more complicated. Just like,
it's hard to be a child. It is hard. It just looks easy. It's hard. And guys, we used to be children, which is the irony of all ironies. How did we forget how hard it is?
Yeah. And that's the thing, like as a mom, like, slow down and ask more questions. Don't just assume that one little 30 seconds is what you're going to tell your kid on how to respond. Like, what else happened? Tell me more. Just having that curiosity of, how she got to where she is. So, well, this has been such a great conversation. I am kind of bummed it's already at the 30-minute mark. But I do want to say thank you so much for being here. And if somebody did want to get in touch with you or learn more about your program, what's the best approach to anyone in our community to meet with you directly?
Absolutely. So I say website is getting completely redone, which hopefully that will be done maybe in a week would be amazing. The website, nanda.com, and then they would just apply, right? They would just submit the application site.
Well, that was a great conversation. I'll make sure Allison posts on the notes when we post this that you can have contact for Mykle, and really enjoyed our conversation with her. Oh, and she's back.
Oh, at nanda.com.
Well, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Well, we have totally enjoyed this half hour. We will talk to you guys next week when we have another Revel Coach Plus conversation. Everybody go on, take on the day.